We are on chapter 5 of Chasing Cyan. I might have mentioned it in the last video, but this editing that I'm doing here for this is at the higher end of my price range. So if you're not looking for this many comments and suggestions, then you could definitely go with a lower price range, and I won't spend quite as much time dissecting every single sentence the way I am here. So let's get on with the story. Chapter 5 of Chasing Cyan. Ah, the elusive wolf nobody but you sees, Megan, the eldest of the neighbor's flock, said. Okay, so I was messing around with settings because I made something disappear. And I have to say that this flock definitely gets the point across, but it did confuse me, especially because at some point I'm expecting this wolf to talk, honestly. I have not read this story before, so that's just something I feel like at some point some animal is going to talk, so then I just assumed that we had talking animals and that this flock was an animal group. Yeah, so that threw me off. But I don't feel like it's wrong because it gets across a good point. He just sat there listening to me for about an hour before he got up and disappeared back into the woods. See, I want a response. It says, I ignored her jest about the creature. She was the only one to believe he existed besides my grandmother. Even the elderly woman seemed uncertain, only taking my word because I belonged to her. Was Megan the name that we had seen before? No. So this isn't that best friend of hers that was randomly mentioned and then named later. Okay. Which I need to write down so I can keep track of. That's where I do need to have some paper notes for things like that. So I'll go through and find that later. But I want to know how she felt about Megan's comment. Or talking to Megan in general. Like, this is a really weird thing. This is a really weird conversation to be having. So we need, like, that internal response from this character. So then things like, she was the only one to believe he existed besides my grandmother. So you could tell us here, how many times have they had this conversation? This is a good place to give us some backstory. About who Megan is, why Cyan trusts her with this conversation, and what else Megan knows about the wolf. Like, just listen a little bit here. And then even the elderly woman seemed uncertain. So this is telling. Show us a little bit of what gives Cyan this impression. That'll give us a bit of character into the grandmother, especially since this story is going to get turned into a full-length novel. We need these characters just to be bigger, to be more. And you didn't say anything to Big Mama? Are you kidding? See, we just have like this back and forth. We need some action from these characters. Like, some more responses from these characters to fill out this back and forth. We don't know what they're doing. If they're sitting, standing, where they are, etc. Just all of those things are you can just drop little tidbits of that. All of those things are good to fill in here and there. Little tidbits at a time. Even including like include the time of day. Is there anyone else potentially nearby that could overhear? In which case, are they whispering? Or even if no one was nearby, wouldn't they still be looking around for people who might potentially overhear? Like, we just need a lot more context here, so that was a lot for the author to think about for filling in here, rather than just having this simple conversation. We need to take this conversation, we have the bare bones of conversation, and we need to make it an actual scene, is kind of what I'm looking for them to do here. Are you kidding? She'd tan my hide for risking my neck that late at night. Besides, I mentioned him a few times before. That's why. Okay, but is this why or when? Yeah, I probably don't need to actually delete this. But is this why? Because she knows for absolute certain, or is this when? Because she isn't a mind reader. And without the grandmother's actual reaction, we don't know that that's exactly why. So, you haven't told us enough about how the grandmother responds for us to agree with it being why. That's another thing. That's why she signed me up for archery, made me a red cloak, and demanded that I stick to worn paths and wagon roads. Well, it did sound like she was on a worn path last night. That is one thing. I miss cutting through the woods for deliveries. So Cyan always So Cyan obeys all of these directives. She doesn't seem like somebody that would. Megan stopped midway up the washboard, eyeing me. See, this is... So this is where, if before now, I would want the author to mention that she's washing clothes. Set the scene for us. Otherwise, we feel like we're listening in on a phone conversation is what I get. Of all the girls in town, she was the only one I trusted. Maybe it was because she hadn't mistreated me when I was forced to move back to the town my mother had escaped. Okay, so what about her best friend? I'm assuming that this is because the best friend lives in another town. This whole, like, just this town, but then that town, and then this town, and that town. We definitely need some names for those. Okay, so first, what about her best friend? You mentioned she had one. Does her best friend live in the other town? And then, so this whole thing with we need more backstory about this whole thing, about this mistreatment. We just have like this, it's just a very vague idea. It's very vague so far, so we can't really empathize with it because we don't know. And then give the towns names, because otherwise it's a lot of confusion about which town you're referring to. Okay, so Megan hadn't mistreated me when I was forced to move back to the town my mother had escaped, unlike the rest of the children my age. Or it could be for her acceptance of an outsider and her ability to connect with everyone. The entire town adored the girl. That's so random. And like, if the entire town adores the girl, like, does the teasing that starts out the chapter really fit then? So that's something to think about. Does the teasing that the chapter starts out with really fit if the entire town adores Megan? Like, she needs to be like the saint of saints if she's the one that everybody loves. what I asked when the silence became awkward. Okay, what does awkward feel like is what I'm going to ask here. At least, what does awkward feel like to Cyan? Like, you don't want to tell us that the silence became awkward. You want to make us don't tell us it became awkward. Make us feel it. Pinching her lips. Is that kind of pinching them together? Because, like, I feel like people, like, you purse your lips, don't you? Pinching her lips. Is this together? Is what I would think. I don't know. It's still, the visual's really weird for me. I feel like you pinch with other things. So how can she restart her washing? Is she pursing her lips? This could be a correct word, and I just don't know it. So I'm just going to leave that. Again, it could be, you know, I know this author lives in a different area than I do. Maybe this is something they say there, so I'm just going to leave a note. I'm not going to assume it's wrong. But I said this is weird because I would assume that you would use your hands to pinch something. So she restarted her washing. After a few moments, she spoke again. So we could get a little more descriptive here because, I mean, a lot of us will resort to just that after a few moments. It's just generic, and this person is actually doing something. So, like, you could be more specific by saying something like, after finishing with one garment and starting on the next, she spoke again. So then we know it's a few moments later, but we're actually, just not falling into that generic of after a few moments. And it gives us a visual of something going on too. Did you take your bow out with you? My friend was worried. Well, no, but I only planned a quick walk. I was upset about the constable. What's up with that man anyway? Didn't he propose to Big Mama or something? Something like that, I sighed, unhappy with the change of subject. See, we don't know if this person is sitting on the ground. Like, is she just standing there? Like, this begs for some movement from the character. But we don't know if she's sitting, understanding. Laying on something. Like, I would just expect, you know, just some sort of shift or something. That sleaze had attempted to prey on my mother before she'd been saved by my father. A kind man from a few villages south of this one. Okay, this, I think, reads better. I am not against, you know, incomplete sentences, fragments, but this is a modifier that could easily be part of the sentence. Otherwise, it reads a little weird. A kind man from a few villages south, we would assume. That's from her current location where she's living. Though it wouldn't surprise me if he'd also had a thing for my grandmother. Okay, this he made me think we were still talking about the dad. I'm still thinking about the dad here as he is the last man mentioned. So rewrite for some clarity of which dude we're talking about. Because that would be weird if the father also had a thing for the grandmother, which is immediately where I went. Like, I'm like, oh. He was quite a bit older than her, and I resembled her as a young woman. Okay, so the dude that just proposed to her is older than her grandmother. Like, that is sleazy. And there needed to be, like, a lot more. Like, everybody's just okay with him proposing to each generation in this family. Like, we need some more backstory on, like, why this is okay. It's just really weird. Okay. So the last thing said was the Megan saying, didn't he propose to Big Mama or something? Oh, okay. We had, did you take your bow out? No, I planned for a quick walk. I was. And then Megan interrupted, upset about the constable. What's up with that man anyway? Didn't he propose to Big Mama or something? Cyan says something like that. Besides, I know that wolf. I added more to myself than my friend. Know him. Sure, you've been seeing the beast for years, but you can't really know a wild animal. I don't know him. It's just, never mind. Yeah, I feel like never mind. Try left clicking. What is with all of these pop-ups? Yeah, I think that's 2 words. How could I admit that the wolf had been at the edge of my vision almost every time I stepped outside for as long as I could remember? Let's break this up. How could I admit... I almost want this, like, drawn out a little bit. Like, how could I admit that I'd seen the wolf so many times? Almost every time I stepped outside, for as long as I was there, for as long as I can remember, he was there at the edge of my vision. Just something to break this up a little bit. I think that would make it more dramatic. This would be more dramatic if we broke it up a little. How could I admit that I'd seen the wolf so many times? Or we already had times, and we're going to use it again. How could I admit that I'd seen the wolf so often? How could I admit that I'd seen the wolf so often and for as long as I could remember? Almost every time I stepped outside, he haunted the edge of my vision. So just something like this. Is what I would do with it. He'd grown quite a bit over the years, but I knew it was him. The same wolf I'd seen near my old village. The one my mother hadn't seemed concerned about. Okay. Is this the, again, like what village? Because isn't she back in the old village? That's what I don't get. I am entirely confused now about what village she's in. Because it says that she was forced to move back to the town that mother had escaped. So, we need some town names here. So the mother wasn't concerned about the wolf or the village. And we need more details about her telling her mother about the wolf if... Man, I don't know why I can't spell wolf. Telling her mother about the wolf if that is... Like, why is the mother nonchalant, but Grammy isn't? Like, that's going to be a question we have. So we need... We need more insight into the first reaction of when these ladies first heard about the wolf. And I hope you give us some backstory about what happened to the parents, especially if the mom was around to hear about the wolf. So a lot of unanswered questions are coming up now. And that's typical of first drafts. So, like, when you're just getting a story down, this is what's going to happen, is there's going to be just a lot of details. The reader's going to have a lot of questions. And so just expect that there's going to be a bunch that you need to add to a first draft when it's not filled out enough. His markings were impossible not to recognize. I was like, his markings were impossible to miss. Or to forget. That reads easier to me. The same markings as the one in my nightmare. I'd even sketched him in my journal a few times. Yet last night had been the first time he'd gotten that close. Megan considered my comment as we worked together in silence. This is a point of view shift, because we're writing in first person limited. This is all I. So that's first person. So she doesn't know what Megan's doing in her head. Maybe she thought I was crazy. Everyone else did. They'd bullied me mercilessly, calling me the girl who cried wolf. So, who all had she talked to about this wolf? Like, she just indiscriminately I said it wrong, so then I spell it wrong. She just indiscriminately went around telling everyone about the wolf. Was that before or after she told her mother? Her mother didn't tell her not to talk about it. It never eventually died down. Like, how long was the length of time between she told her mother and told her grandmother? We need some of this stuff filled in. And why did she tell her grandmother if her mother wasn't worried about it? A lot of these things, too, the author probably has an idea of the answers for, because we have a lot more of our story built out in our head than what we get down on paper. So that's where having somebody help you with beta reading or developmental comments, they're going to ask you the questions about the things that you forgot to write about. So what are you going to do to shake the old huntsman? Megan asked after a while. It's just a weird... Oh, and they're working together in silence. Okay. Here. At no point... is it not going to let me do a new comment? It says go to comment. I want to make a new comment. Okay. We will edit the comment. Also, at no point did you tell me that Cyan was also washing clothes. That's another key thing. I kept asking what's Cyan doing. So she's been washing clothes all along. We just didn't know it. So what are you going to do to shake the old huntsman? Megan asked after a while. It's not the best way to say a few minutes passed in silence, but I've been quite picky so far. And I feel like another thing too, like why I'm not going to leave a lot of line edits, is because since I've asked so many questions, this whole scene is probably going to get rewritten. Just like some of the dialogue will probably stay, but I imagine that a lot of the rest of it is going to change. So on something that needs this many developmental edits, I'm not going to focus nearly as much on anything line edits unless I see an author making like a repeated mistake that I can be like, hey, you've done this several times, and it'll strengthen your writing if you do it differently. Okay, so what are you going to do to shake the old huntsman? Megan asked after a while. I don't know. I turned him down, but his... Okay, also, Constable and Huntsman, can he have a name? So the old huntsman is a constable. So the old huntsman is the constable, and no one calls him by his name. I turned him down, but his reaction makes me afraid he's going to get progressively more aggressive with his request. His reaction makes me afraid he's going to get progressively okay, I'm also not opposed to a conjunction starting a question, and this is a really long sentence. So I'm going to do that. And I think people start sentences with conjunctions all the time when they speak. I definitely do it a lot in my nonfiction. So dialogue and stories should reflect how real people speak. Make me afraid. Okay, maybe you should marry one of the boys from town. No. My response came out hurried and final. The boys around this place had mistreated me from day one. They pulled my hair, threw things at me, knocked over my drinks. Boys will be boys, the adults would say, and laugh about the behavior. See, I thought when it says, Megan hadn't mistreated me when I was forced to move back to the town my mother had escaped. I thought she had moved back to this town. So the boys were doing this to her when she was a baby. Like, it's just a bit confusing. This town thing is confusing. They pulled my hair, threw things at me, knocked over my drinks. Like, this is weird. Like, is this at, like, drinks at school? Like, what sort of drinks are kids just walking around with in these villages? It seems random. Boys will be boys, the adults would say, and laugh about the behavior. Also, these adults are jerks. No wonder the kids are brats. No way I'd sign up to live the rest of my life that way. Didn't you say you used to have a crush on some boy in your old village? Dominic, I sighed. She sighed up here too. Maybe, so she's citing the scene already. Maybe give us a glimpse of what she's feeling. That's always a good thing. It's been a while since I thought about him. The lie fell easily from my lips, though I'd told the wolf about him just the night before. It was strange, but something about the large canine's mannerisms had pulled at an old memory of the boy next door. So instead of that, it was strange. The lie fell easily from my lips, though I told the wolf about him just the night before. I couldn't explain why. Again, I don't mind starting a sentence with a conjunction. So this is how I would write it. I couldn't explain why, but something about the large canine's mannerisms had pulled at an old memory of the boy next door. Maybe it was the nagging image of a smaller animal with the same markings back home before the accident. Isn't she convinced that it's the same wolf? Like, that would be... This makes me feel like she's not convinced that it's the same wolf, but I feel like we'd been told that she's convinced it's the same wolf. thinking of the time before. So if this is the time before the accident and the accident prompted a move, then you could say yeah, I would just add that as a clarification, because wasn't she forced to move because of the accident? So I would just say something like, thinking of the time before I was forced to move often dredged up memories that still pain me. Especially when they were about the crush I'd had growing up. No. How about especially when they were about my childhood crush? That's the crush you have when you're growing up, but it just reads easier. He'd been my best friend, never knowing that I liked him. He'd been my best friend. I didn't want to ruin that by telling him I liked him, is where I would go with that. Just read weird. When my parents died, I moved away and hadn't gone back to my father's village since I was 10. So, like, where is she now? I'm so confused about where she is now. Oh, it's because it was connected. Maybe. Here we go. Yeah, I'm so confused about where she is now. Sorry. I'm not following, or it's not clear. I'm just not sure about all of these villages. I know that there is a certain part of storytelling where you're trying to build like some suspense, keep the reader in the dark a little bit. You only tell them what they need to know, but we need to know a little bit more. So this is another thing too, by the time that we get to this accident, because like you have to, as an author, tell us about it at this point. Like, it's been this ongoing theme that keeps getting talked about. So that's where there might be parts of it that needed to be told a bit sooner. That, it doesn't come across exactly the way that the author thought it was going to. So, Cyan. And now I was thinking of him again, wondering if he remembered me, if he'd become betrothed, or what he'd think if I showed up in town. This would be, I feel like all of this could be fragments, honestly. Yeah, I personally, just for effect, even though it's, not correct grammar, I would consider making all of, not that comma. But just, just for that slowness of the thought of just like, and now I was thinking of him again, wondering if he remembered me, if he'd become betrothed, or what he'd think if I showed up in town. So like some of these could be periods for cause and effect, in my opinion. Sorry, did you say something? I was asking if you kept in touch with his family after moving in with Big Mama. Well, yes and no. When we went back to settle their estate, I got to spend a little time with him, and his mother promised to send letters. I talked Big Mama into going back for my 10th birthday, and they weren't there. So, like, just this timeline of when they moved away, how long were they gone? Did they move away? I don't know. The only thing I do know is that I never received any correspondence. We kind of need to know, like, how long that was. Because this isn't... With a crush like this, it... Especially, the author said, especially when they were the crush I had growing up. She's still growing up when she's 10. Like, she's not... So, I had a totally different age in my head. At a totally different age in my head based on her reaction to his name and how old she was when they went back for her birthday. So, I feel like if for this to be poignant, we need a bit more about her relationship with him. And maybe to know here or by now how old she was when they left that village and how long between when they went back. Just something like that. So, yeah, chapter 5 brought up way more questions than answers. But we're only about a third of the way through the story, so who knows? Maybe it gets pulled together. But there's a lot of details that could be brought out. I do believe that the author said that this was going to be the third book in a trilogy. I hope she doesn't mind that I said that. Because then we're giving away the end of the trilogy. So, oh shoot, she's going to be mad at me. But there's still... I don't know. I might have to cut that part out. Haha.